we are talking about the larynx today, and anybody that read the article, you will know that it was based very much around. It's very much around the optimal placement of the larynx. And look, there's a lot of talk about is a low larynx good? Is a high larynx good? And so we're going to cover a little bit of that today, but for the most part, we're going to just assume that you read the article and you know that it very much depends on situation again. So we'll get stuck into that in a minute. We also have some other questions that were sent through prior to the webinar, and also if you've got any questions yourselves on this chat here, please send them in, because as I say, most of what we can talk about the larynx is already in the article. And so we'd rather just get on and answer some questions, because that can often be more practical and give more value. And so I'll throw us into the start of just to give some context to the larynx and why we care about it so much. And the truth of it is that I think there's some confusion over what we used to do with the larynx. And when I say used to, I mean many, like 20, 30, 40 years ago, when maybe singing was, in a societal sense, based more around classical music. And then now we have this new sound that we want to create, which clearly, or as far as the scientists are concerned, we need to create a different posture in order to create that sound. And so it's caused a bit of confusion, but we do know that the dependent on the pitch that we want to sing and dependent on the tonal quality that we want to produce, the larynx will have to sit in a certain position, and that really does depend on those two variables, plus maybe a few others. And so if we're looking at belting, for example, it's shown that the larynx will have to sit a little bit higher from the offset in order to facilitate the acoustic outcome that we want. Hi, Biff.
Hi, mate. Can you hear me?
Yeah, welcome. Yeah, your internet's a lot better now.
It is, yeah. Sorry about that, guys. Sorry about that. I was on time, just so everyone knows.
So all I'm doing, just to give context, I just said, look, the article's there, we want some questions, but I've also just said that we know that there's some confusion from the past about the larynx sat in a certain place. We know that that's coupled with nowadays when you're a different situation, but that, to be honest with you, even now, it depends on the pitch that we're creating and the tone that we want to create as to where the larynx is going to sit. This is why there's a lot of confusion, and this is why it's tricky to give a exact answer on what needs to happen. But there are a couple of fundamentals, and one of those is that the larynx has to rise in order to produce especially the energy that we would like to produce in a contemporary manner. The larynx has to rise with pitch. Now, the question, then you may get some people saying, yeah, but it friggin' kills me when I do that. Yeah, rising, but perhaps not rising with squeeze and horrible control, let's call it. that they're two different conversations, but flexibility of the larynx and enabling it to rise with pitch will best help us create the contemporary sound that we want right now. And I think that probably summarizes where most people will want to come at this kind of larynx debate from in the contemporary manner. Do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and I was reading a book a little while ago about gospel singing from Dr. Trinice Robinson?
That's a new book,
I think.
Right?
Anyway, yeah, it's a really good book, right? And she makes a good point in that I often regurgitate. You hear a lot of advice to not let the larynx go up, and you must feel no tension, right? And it's like, good luck singing gospel. It's like, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So if you want to create certain sounds and certain styles, in gospel, you're gonna be constricted. There's no of doing it. It's gonna sound crap if you do it like that. But singers have ways of managing constriction, and allowing it to happen and allowing the larynx to raise. But at the end of the day, they're in many ways able to return back to normal when they're not singing. It's often the whole thing about the larynx going up is, like you said, mate, people say it kills me because the larynx raising is a symptom of strain. But that's not all it is. That's and in fact, some pedagogies just see it as that's what the larynx being high is. It's a symptom of strain, but it's not. That's one when it's out of control and certain muscles are out of are not flexible enough. But it's also a byproduct of style. So we have to look at it like that. We have to avoid the strainy bit and embrace the styly bit. And I think that's kind of reinforcing what you're saying there. But yeah, so where do we go from here? We're going to look at why would we use a larynx position?
Yeah. So why would we go for a high larynx position?
Well, in the article, we cite a few reasons, common reasons why we might use it. And by the way, anybody who's listening, we will be going through some questions as well in a bit that we've got. I've done a survey. But yeah, the high larynx might be used in for style whenever the instrument length is changed. So the instrument being larynx to lips, if that is shortened, and when it shortens, quite often that comes with some narrowing in the back as well. That can create some quite sort of bright, brassy sounds. So it might be, or certainly is good for a lot of belting, a lot of calling. In country styles, it's just synonymous with the style around it. And we might use it for that stylistic purpose. Also, when we do that with the larynx, in many cases, it assists with things technically. So it may assist someone in accessing more vocal fold closure if they're training in to be less breathy. One might see that in like the whiny kid thing, like yeah, like it's often an exercise that for creating some nice easy adduction on the vocal folds, and following on from that, yes, that gives it an application in some singers trying to find their chest voice as well, mainly females or maybe some guys stabilizing it. So yes, and embelting's a big subject that we'll probably get into in a bit because someone's mentioned it in the questions. But why would we use a low larynx?
Well, just off the back of that, on the high larynx here, something we've spoken about before, just to touch upon it in a practical manner. We've spoken about the fact that all the things you mentioned there, the sound quality that's produced, as well as clearly the ease, and this is degrees of the larynx going up, obviously, dependent on pitch, but the ease of producing the sound from a larynx that can rise, because that's what's optimal for that pitch. So those two things in tandem, we've said that the people that are singing pop music or musical theatre will often won't appreciate just how much the larynx should be raised for the music we're singing, and therefore most of us will need that to happen in order to create the sounds and to feel the way we want to feel when we sing the songs. And so acknowledging that before we start and warming up in that manner, in a sense, having the freedom for the larynx to raise and setting the larynx in a place where you're ready to go is probably really valuable. And I say probably, I mean, it is very, very valuable for anybody that wants to sing in that way, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's certainly for me, I feel like where I wake up in the morning, my larynx sits quite low and my voice sits very low in the mornings. I think exercises to give my larynx that flexibility to move up and down throughout my range means that I can tune into my sound and my style if I have enough flexibility to let my larynx find it with me, and it needs to be able to find its full range of motion for me to do that. And if I keep doing low larynx exercises, I'm never going to get it. It just doesn't work with what I do. So you're right. It's about that flexibility.
And I would go as far to say that the flexibility of the larynx and the raising of it, and the ability to raise it, you can almost see it with most, I'd say, unaware singers about the larynx situation. In that thing when pop singers squeeze, I almost see that as a direct result of not being able to position the larynx in a good place in order to attain the pitch they want to create. I almost see like, let's create some tension, extra tension to raise the pitch, because it's just a quicker, more probably instinctive way to make the pitch happen, as opposed to allowing the larynx to rise, which is, that allowance word is a can of worms all in itself. But
yeah, I know. I mean, we say it a lot, right? Because when there's flexibility and when there's there's not the mental blockage or fear around delivering the note, and the body and the posture and everything is like really kind of in a good synergy, then it's much easier to allow things to happen. Singers don't start off that way, because modern life just creates very inflexible singing voices, doesn't it? So it's almost like, and I think that's why with the high larynx, a lot of pedagogies in the past have, instead of allowing, have forced it into a position, because it won't go there by allowing it. So it's almost like sticking up there or down there. And then if we're pronounced enough, we can manipulate that to the point where it's just, it's another level of inflexibility, but it might help us in that short period where we're doing it. We get that funny effect from it, but after a while, it's just going to screw us in the other direction.
Yep, exactly. And so the low larynx, I think you just touched upon it there, which is one of the places where, as a teacher, we would use that approach. Would be, and I know this is probably stuff that a lot of people may already know, but with the long-term idea of somebody gaining more awareness and then therefore control of the larynx, is to drop the larynx and to disassociate it with the tension or the mishaps that might be occurring currently with the voice. And this is why, as you just said there, it's like, get out of the frigging way, and then just allow yourself to adjust through pitches without anything too crazy going on. And so that's one of, in the contemporary world, that's where the low larynx will come into it. And even more advanced than that, I guess, is that if someone is having trouble with their bridge, that that whatever vowel we're using, going through those notes that where the acoustic shift is going to happen, it's not just a starters thing. You can also use it there in order to train in adduction of the vocal folds, or encourage some adduction of the vocal folds, without, again, perhaps engaging too much of a outstretched TA, or at least relieving excess tension and then re-adding it in a way. So we've dropped the larynx and then start to see if we can add some adduction in there, a bit higher up, for example. That's just another strategy a bit further down the line you could use for a singer. But where else would you use it?
Well, in the article we mentioned that keeping a low larynx throughout the middle of the voice, which people might see as the break or the passaggio, is not, but is useful to be demonstrated. And again, it's not about like holding a larynx in place, but rather accessing a certain sound that feels easy, like we might be that sort of woo, that sort of slightly whoopy sound, right? The very, very, I think, parts of classical teaching, which I'm really not a fan of taking into contemporary music. But however, classical teaching is almost formed on being able to not allow the larynx to be dragging up at the passaggio and sound to track that yell, and instead they train the second harmonic, if it's any geeks, to pass over the first formant. That's just a geeky thing, but they're training that a lot. And I think there's still relevance in that in the early stages of contemporary teaching, where we ooh, and we're able to not allow ooh to happen, is really, really great thing. And if some teachers out there are wondering, yeah, but how high can you take that condition before it becomes unhelpful? And that's where you absolutely need to know about formants and harmonics. You absolutely need to know, because if you know a little bit about formants and harmonics and you're aware of ooh and the first formant of it, the pitch that it will comfortably resonate, or the fundamental that it will comfortably resonate, if you try and take the pitch above the value of the first formant of that vowel, then you will have to raise your larynx. You've got no choice. So why would you take a singer higher than that point but make them stay in that vowel? Ooh, it's going to end up like that, I promise you. So that's where it's, yeah, watch them fail. And that's where you see, you know, like, and again, I understand why. I'm not bashing teachers for this, because it's not always on the radar. But to ask someone to be incredibly dopey on C6, like a female dopey on C, is a little bit crazy, because there are just no dumb vowels, no vowels like that will work that high. And if they get it right, it's because they let their larynx go up, not because the larynx stayed low. So yeah, that's the caveat for teachers who are finding out where is appropriate to keep a low larynx position, and that part of science is the key, I think, for me. Yeah, the tracking of the energy is where the larynx position really comes into itself, isn't it? That's the yeah. And you could get really geeky with that, as you say, you know. And when you say low larynx to track whichever harmonic you want to track, it's kind of how low? A smidgen. I mean, it's craziness, really. Smidgen. Yeah, do you know what I mean? Colloquial language. Is that? Would anybody know what that means apart from British? That's my point. It's kind of that's why it's so smidge. Because no one. I mean, and how do you even control that? This is why it's almost, as some people might refer to the knowing of formants and harmonics as being slightly, unpractical, let's say. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I totally know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, it's like with a lot of things in voice, like how much breath you deliver, how much lung pressure you deliver to a setting on your voice, and what vowel shape. We have no other choice but to just be close, and hopefully our body will readjust if we're not too far away, or if we're too far away. If we're too inaccurate in some way, then our body can't clear it up. So if we're aware of sensations, we can create a vowel shape that will be close, and hopefully something will just readjust if we're flexible enough, not if we're rigid. It's the same with the body and breathing. If we deliver too much lung pressure, our ribs can take that pressure on and expand if it's too much. But if we don't have that flexibility from posture problems and muscle tension, we can't have that function be much more likely to crack. So yeah, I totally get your point on that one. Yeah, we've had some questions on the chat. And it's gone formant and harmonic crazy. The first thing I would say, because somebody where's the best place to learn about harmonics and formants? What I would say first up is that there is probably nowhere that, even if you read the definition of formant and harmonic, it probably won't help you understand it in a singing sense straight away. And I would say, to be honest with you, don't freak out over this, but
time spent in reading so many different angles on this subject is I would say the best and the only way really to go about this thing. So don't be worried that you don't understand what it means. So formant harmonics. Do we go into that now?
Well, we can. I probably not. I mean, we're talking about larynx height, but it is if Lee has mentioned Bozeman or Sundberg. I mean, Sundberg. If you were to type Sundberg formants into YouTube, there is a great video that he explains what formants are, and he does it with a duck quacker. So there's quite a few things. And Lee also mentions Bozeman. And that's Kenneth Bozeman. He writes a great book called Practical Vocal Acoustics, which talks about formants and harmonics. And so if you want to go into those in spare time, that would be more than worth it if you're a vocal coach, but maybe interesting if you're a singer, or just horrible.
and whoever in this room right now, don't be afraid to take it all the way back to it's the same principle as I've read a book about how we learn once upon a time, and this guy said it really well. It was quite layman's terms the way he put it, was like, how do you become a guru? What's the difference between a guru and somebody who's just started? And his definition of a guru was somebody that can give very simple explanation for things. And the truth of it is that you become a guru by deconstructing everything to its simplest form. So you look at that aspect, you look at that aspect, you look at that aspect, and then across weeks, months of learning each aspect, then you can make the correlations and the links between certain things, and even reject things that don't matter in the situation, and you can take a grander view of the whole situation. And this is exactly a situation like that, because we feel like, oh, somebody mentioned about formant harmonics with singing. I'm a singing teacher, I'm a singer. That should be something that I should be able to talk about, or that should come to me easily. But it's not. We're talking about acoustics. We're talking deep science. And so I would say to anyone, go read how a sound wave is created, and then what happens to the spectrum of sound once that particular sound is made, and how the ear perceives the sound, and then also what spaces do to sound dependent on the shape of that space. And then that will start to give you the building blocks to, so a little bit of background on just how sound is made is a great start for this thing.
Yeah, and the harmonics can be a little bit like, what? But you just keep reading it and reading it. And Leah's also mentioned there about squeezing to lift pitch, and where do we stand on the pharyngeal constrictors helping to adjust the vocal tract in contemporary singing?
Well, I would just say varying degrees of worth, once again, and almost like the / depends answer, in that somebody might ask that because when they go high, like it's 150%, and it's like, well, he said that you have to squeeze to make that to happen. I'm not saying this is you, Lee, but that isn't what we're saying. We know that based on what we just said, the shapes of our vocal tract will alter the tone. They will also alter the pressures within the mouth. They will also then feed back to the vocal folds. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't meaning you, Lee. I kind of guess you were a girl, but I was just hypothetically speaking that this guy, whoever it is, might ask. So the formant / the shapes of the throat and mouth have to change, and that is really the pliability of that and how they move. We definitely got to use that and take that into account. But dependent on the pitch, dependent on the sound you want to create, it's all how much, varying degrees of, I would say, on that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I don't know if you were here earlier, Lee, about the comment on gospel is that I mentioned earlier. You cannot sing gospel without some pharyngeal constriction. It's just the way it is. But we mentioned earlier, you just got to be able to switch it off. Scott says, what are your indicators without computer software to let you know the larynx and tensions are too high? And that would be like, that's a big pursuit, because we're talking about perceptions, we're talking about physical sensations. Singing teachers are also trained in a lot of hear that tension and hear it as, most importantly, effort. You know, if we hear a sound and the singer's like, I'm feeling okay, but then okay is certainly relative to how you felt before. You know, if you feel better, that may feel like amazing to you, but somebody who's trained might be like, yeah, but there's another way to go before that sound is truly easy, and the unnecessary tension is eradicated. So it's quite hard to tell, but fatigue is another one. Yeah. And range accessibility as well. If you get knackered and you can't realize your full range, then they're very, very quick indicators of whether you're tense. And vocal fold closure is another big one as well, Scott, that if you sound a bit leaky or a bit like, or you genuinely sound, as Steve put it, then you could be too tense. You could be, but you really need a trained person to do that for you. Coming in, but we want to get, Steve, let me ask you one of the questions from the survey, which is, what do you guys think is the healthiest height for the larynx? And at the same time, the belting be done in the healthiest way by raising the larynx, and how far? So it's two questions. What's the healthiest height? And can belting be done healthy by raising the larynx, and how far?
Okay, so I'll go for the first one here and almost tie it into, I'm so sorry, I can't pronounce that name. Is it Salim? Salim,
possibly.
About the speaking position before working. Is it good to get the larynx to a speaking position? And this kind of ties in with this. What's it? Salimi. Thought it was. Boom. Thank you. The speaking position, is that healthy? And is it worth getting it there first? I mean, depending on where your speaking voice is. If you're talking down there, then it's probably not going to be that beneficial if you're singing pop music. But so I would say, depending on pitch, does it feel comfortable? And then the next question is are you creating the sound you want to create? Comfort levels, this is what we're talking about. So I wouldn't say there, Salimi, that I wouldn't spend time focusing on trying to match your speaking height or what it feels like to speak when you're warming up the voice. And so in answer to the question from before about the healthiest, that really does just depend on the sound you're creating and the pitch that you're singing. However, as we've discussed quite a lot here, the freedom, raising the larynx and up and down, is the healthiest approach. To get practical with it, training ways to find freedom in the movement is the healthiest way to the healthy thing to do.
And that, by the way, mate, that question was from Florencia, and it was on the other sheet. Yeah,
I was down there. I'll tie them in.
Oh, see, sorry. Yeah. Tie them in. Okay, cool.
I can do that.
Sorry. Oh yeah, you had me confused there for a second.
Yeah, you know what? It's a bit complex.
To add to that, right now, in operatic teaching, a lot of the time, and in some cases, there's careful thought around the larynx position when singing certain pitches. and positioning of other parts of the vocal tract in order for strength or sargio or style or whatever. But when it comes to contemporary singing, I think Jeannie Levitri makes a good point, who's a previous podcast guest. And there's research in primal sounds as well, which is something that Janice Chapman, who's a pedagogue, has been a big proponent of. If you can access certain primal sounds, that your body will readjust your vocal tract and your mouth shapes to satisfy that primal sound. And by primal sound, I mean an emotional quality, right? So let's say I was going to go, hey! Like I was going to do that and just call out. Now that's essentially belting, right? And I haven't decided that I'm going to jack it up. I've just decided that I'm going to call out and I'm not going to think about it. I can barely hear because these are in my ears. Hey! And then it's shouting, but it's not this one. Ah! It's not that one. That's the really terrible one, right? That one, the first one that I did, is the flexible one, and it has the right sentiment behind it. Master some of these things. Another one is like woo, 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 that sort of thing. And other ones are like crying, laughing, sobbing, for instance. Jeannie talked in one of her episodes about the fact that if you can get those sounds down and you have a healthy body, the necessary larynx position and the necessary formant harmonic relation will, in many cases, find itself. And that's how many singers in the past have done it intuitively, because they have no fear, they have connection to their emotions, and they have a voice and body that is flexible enough to just fulfill their requests for the sound, which is really cool. Others not so much. And in opera, it has to be a bit more thoughtful. But I think that might take away some of the need to be correct about the larynx position and what's best, for the sake of simplicity in some of this stuff.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's so many variables.
Shall I hit you with another?
There's so many variables in that, aren't there? And this is the thing. You know, you can totally see the logic and the value in what you just said. It's totally got a case. And then you've got the other side, which may be somebody may not be naturally built to do that, to match the expectation that they have for their music or their artistry or whatever else. And then you've got the and they might be the people that are like, well, I can just do what I want, and as long as I'm emotional, it's just a scale all the time. And as you say, I think the point that you're making is that people that, yeah, rightly, is that you, this is for the people. I think the primal thing you mentioned there is for the people that are obsessing over the larynx height, and they've probably spent many years training, and now it's time to just go, do you know what? Let's just see. Let's just allow. Let's just see what's going to happen if we just let go. Now, I'll read you the next question, mate.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
This is from Idenlib. How to separate twang, ariepiglottic sphincter from larynx position, especially for those of us who have a weighty, pulley tendency in which the larynx tends to rise anyway. I should need to plug in my laptop, because otherwise I won't be here much longer.
It's going to die. But that's an interesting question, right? So it's talking about the narrowing. There's a little tube just above the vocal folds that exits the larynx, the ariepiglottic sphincter tube, if you like. And it has its own resonances, and it basically is in the larynx. It's the exit to the larynx, so it's going to be very hard to separate them in that way. And there's a lot of discussion about whether someone can genuinely create a connection to the epilarynx tube and narrow it in isolation, that is. And most of the pedagogues say, and don't get me wrong, it's been observed that there's a narrowing of that tube, and it's been researched to have amazing benefits for smoothing out someone's break and allowing them to be incredibly powerful and loads of stuff, right? But the direct control of that narrowing is something that is not understood. And anybody, I think, who claims to be able to narrow it as an isolated move, I don't think fully, I don't know, versed in this whole thing. I just don't think it's proven and it's necessarily possible. I think the narrowing of that tube and whatever comes along with other things. So then we get, like we had some before, we get a massive complex balls. And it's said that, you know, if you adduct the vocal folds some more, it's also been talked about that some of the fibers of the vocal fold muscle run into the false folds in the tube above. So with more, you typically get more narrowing of that tube. So are we seeing that somebody is narrowing the epilarynx tube, or are we seeing that someone is adding more cord closure, which then brings the spaces above it together a little bit more to give you that brassy sound? So then it's not just the tube, it's the cord closure. And then most of the classical pedagogues who want to influence that little tube for the sake of resonance strategies for filling concert halls, they're trying to access it through the sound. So it's very much like a perceptual thing, which is, again, just not really understood. Separating those I always forget. IDAN. Separating those, separating those is very difficult. And I would say that if you've got a weighty sound on the way through the middle, it's more likely to just be the mechanism of chest and how that contributes to vocal fold closure. If it's being overcooked a little bit, vocal fold closure will be a little on the pressed side, which means that when the vocal folds needs to stretch out, they're going to have a lot of trouble doing that. Far too tight with muscle activity. And then at some point you have to compensate for that by letting go of the chest voice mechanism, the thyroretinoid, whatever you want to say, thus allowing the vocal fold to stretch a little further. So it's more about working into the fact of being a little bit more heady in your chest voice on the approach to the bridge, so that your gradual relaxation of that chest voice muscle, that TA, so that the CT muscle, the one that stretches the vocal folds, can then begin to lengthen the cords, which retains some of that fullness of tone, that you didn't just drop that chest voice out, but it was a gradual thing. And that's what I think. I wouldn't be obsessing about the epilarynx. Do that job. That is a vocal fold job, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
don't know how do you feel about that, Steve?
But yeah, great. I'm just trying to analyze this question for what we might be asking, because sometimes the question's asked and there's like hidden meanings and stuff, right? And it isn't exactly what we mean. So I'm just trying to deconstruct it. And I kind of got the idea that we've perhaps, I'm not shooting down here, but like the aryepiglottic sphincter. We kind of hear that as that's what I need to access these days, because that's going to give me some freedom in the best way. And that's, I mean, may or may not be true, as you just said. But so the next bit of the question, which is, I've got a weighty pull tendency in which and when I raise my larynx. So that's really the situation we're talking about. And let's just say, put it into, so we can visualize this. I hear this a lot with young guys with voices just broke. Yeah. Got deeper. And so what you'll find is that when you demonstrate and you're trying to hear this that kind of movement and that kind of sound that you'd possibly relate to an aryepiglottic sphincter or a twang. And I often find that these younger guys really struggle to create that sound. which you would go as far to say that potentially that's because of the lack of pliability, the new system that they've got to manage, and it's all just a little bit rigid at that moment in time. So if that is the case, and that could be the same for somebody who just started out and they are just heavy, So as a action plan to fix that, as you just said, mate, I thought it was great that getting out of it and creating postures that where you can the whether it's a thyroidnoid or something about that low posture that's preventing movement in the rest of the instrument, get out of that. And even if it is up in the top and like, if it's that, which is so far away from that thing that you may want to do, which might be nay, 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 which in your language might be more like nay, 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 nay. You feel that tension. So that getting out of it and making some squeezes and some of that, what would be perceived as a twangy sound, is a way to start to encourage the body to do it wherever it's at. So that would be a fix for that, as you just said.
Yeah, right? Totally. And with twang, it's like, what does twang come along with anyway? Is it a high larynx that's helping people to go through the passaggio, or in twang? A lot of time, twang's quite like whiny, like yeah, that kind of thing. If it's whiny or it contains some cry, that's going to do a load more than just move the larynx up or narrow the vocal tract. I mean, cry has influences on the vocal folds as well. So, which can influence them more towards a heady position. So we have to really define, what are we talking, twang, or are we talking whiny cry twang, or what are we talking about? Because it's going to be very hard to define, isn't it?
Yeah. And depending on where, as you say, where you're at, it's you may not be able to get close to anything that's like any of that. So
yeah, and you know what, Lee's mentioned something that's really, I think, is really valuable. I found twangy sounds are helpful for better closure and lighter effort sounds. So stop students who have a sense of push. And Lee, if you go to thenakedvocalist.com and look at the latest blog article, which is on phonation threshold pressure. Twangy sounds are great because they do influence the vocal folds into adduction. And when the vocal folds are in a state of adduction where not just like falsetto and not just pressed together hard, but when they come together full and clean, that carries the least in threshold pressure. You basically don't need as much lung pressure to create a sound when your adduction is really good, which is a great thing for clean voice. That's why clean voices are so efficient, even though they're really loud. If we hear more volume, we often think, oh, that person's probably going to tire quicker, but certainly a sweet spot in terms of phonation threshold pressure where great adduction and full sound are actually the most efficient. And that can be why I think twang or narrowing can be mistaken for the reason why effort and function and range is released. Because if phonation threshold pressure is wonderful and you don't need to use a lot of lung pressure, raising pitch and lowering pitch is going to be easier anyway. So it's not that it helps you, it's because it helps you reduce pressure in order to sing. And that has a knock-on effect on function. So you can go round and round in circles as to what the causes and the symptoms are, but really we're still feeling around in the dark and just using our educated guesses to go, oh, well, that works. Let's deduce that might be one of these three things, but frig it, we'll just go with it. And eventually someone much cleverer than us will research it and tell us what is actually happening. So it's interesting. I don't know if you feel it, Steve, but we have some other questions on here. But A, we're running out of time.
Yeah.
B, they are completely unrelated to the topic. Which is so we appreciate your questions, but the larynx debate is I guess we should really stay on topic. In which case we should really wrap it up, mate. What do you think?
I would. Should we just answer that last one from Salimi? How do you differentiate between a very strong mix and a belt? Just throw that in. Just as Chris is saying, we're going to wrap it up, and you throw that one in.
Yeah, I reckon I could probably do that one in 4 words.
Come on.
Who gives a shit?
Obviously, Salimi.
I'm sorry, Salimi. It was just like an opportunity to be a tosspot, which is basically my job in life.
You can put lessons with Chris right now.
What, in being a tosspot?
Yeah. Pay for.
Yeah. I don't really. If the listener is going, wow, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. And if the musical director is going, wow, that sounds like a belt, and functionally underneath it's a strong mix, it's like, I don't care. What do you think?
Yeah, I do you know what? With this question, I actually every time somebody, and this isn't the time for it, but I'm not going to go at you, silly me at all. I'm really not, because we think it and we ask the question and you hear it all the time, but it actually interests me more about why we care so much. That's because we do obviously care. Everyone cares. Everyone wants to know the answer to it, and I actually think it's more to do with we don't want to get it. We want an easy way, clearly, but we don't want to, and we don't want to destroy ourselves. And oftentimes, when a trained singer comes in, you will have the choice between a really a whopper of a sound, and this thing that they call a cheat. And that's what's confusing to people. But I always come down to if there's a vocal fold positioning and there's a vocal track positioning, and there isn't much between the two. So, which then leads you to Chris's answer, which is which is not maybe. Not, I don't care. It's more just that's too much to think about. It's overwhelming.
You laughed at your own answer there.
It's overwhelming to me. I feel in my moment of learning, I feel overwhelmed, so I get frustrated, and then I get aggressive. That's probably what happened to you as well. I know. That's the circle. That's the circle of life. In fact. Oh, great! That's hilarious. Okay, now we just want to let you guys know of a few things. There's a great webinar happening on Tuesday, the 29th of August this year at 6 p.m. That's British time. It's going to be on vocal health and well-being, so which I feel like certainly from your point of view as well, Steve, I know you've done a lot of work on this. You can get so far with technique, but sometimes care as well. Performing arts medicine specialist Lynn Hilton, who's also the editor of iSing magazine, is going to answer all of your questions on vocal health, maintenance, and tips in order to help you sing the entire distance. So please do get yourself along to the iSingmag website, and it will be on there under webinars for you to register. Definitely download the magazine if you haven't got it. Every article is of amazing value, and also thanks to everyone who sent in questions to this and attended today. Again, another great turnout, 127 people. So thank you so much. We've got new stuff coming out all the time now at thenakedvocalist.com on the blog and the podcast. I think our next podcast is Top Songwriter. Is that our next one? No. I don't, we need to talk about that.
No. Did I get that wrong?
No, it was going to be. Oh, no, I get you. It was going to be, wasn't it? But then I've noticed something since, so we might have to just change the order a little bit. But we'll let you know. Like a big surprise. But can I just say to everyone on that the next webinar about the health and well-being, I just want to say that based on the research that I've done for my studies, I came from a place of, when I first started out with teaching singing, that it was all about this, and I couldn't have done any much more of a 360 on that whole situation. In that everything else, I don't want to say matters more. I'm going to say matters more than this. And the point is that next webinar is Lynn, and in terms of authority and knowing that it's coming from a place of research, just completely informed, not just well informed, completely informed, you'll get a lot of value from that in an area where I actually feel, coming from a place, like I said, is actually more people are going to be talking about it in the future.
Yeah.
The effects of everything else aside from just doing a few exercises. So
Great
get on
stuff.
board with that.
Yeah. Lee with her comment of, the more you learn, the less you feel you know. Yeah. The universe opens up and you're like, shit, I am so small.
I don't know anything.
Yeah. And thanks again, Amy. Thanks for joining us. Salimi, Kim, Lee, Scott, thank you so much. And who else was there? That was it. Seamus for getting involved. Okay, hopefully see you again next time. We'll have a webinar again, probably in around about a month's time.
Goodbye for now.